Hey everyone, Kyle from Andrew Hilton here, and happy holidays. This is our last beer tasting before Christmas and our last beer tasting of 2021. And I think it's very appropriate for us to do winter beers. Now, I did want to do like Christmas style beers, but there just weren't enough of them on the market, and two of the ones I wanted to do sold out. So we're gonna do winter beers. And we're gonna open off with our good friends at Oldman River have a brand new beer. This is their winter seasonal. It's a vanilla rye porter. Now, it's not a spiced beer other than the vanilla, but rye has such a wonderful peppery kind of cinnamon character to it anyway that this actually comes off more like a spiced beer than it has any right to. And then we'll go to Muskoka. Now, Muskoka has been around since 1996. They're one of the oldest craft breweries in Canada, and this is out of their Stout series, their winter beer. This is a double chocolate cranberry stout, so perfect for Christmas time.
Next up,
the good folks at Heathens, the gluten-free specialist brewery out of Calgary. Now, Jeff and his crew over there have been making fantastic gluten-free beer for a while, and I think we tasted way back in the day their gluten-free IPA, but he has a winter ale I really like, so we're going to taste that as well. And then finally, well, we're going to do Samuel Smith's Winter Welcome Ale. Now, this is probably the oldest Christmas ale on the market, and thank you to Samuel Smith for putting this on sale this week, which is the only way we kind of snuck this one under the budget. So really happy we get to pour this one. Actually, in volume, hilariously, all of these are 473s. This is just a 500, so despite being wildly larger in size, it's actually only 23 mils more, 27 mils more, but it's still going to be a wonderful lineup for a winter tasting. So put on your toques, sit down by the tree, and let's drink some winter beer.
Size, it's actually like 23 mils more, 27 mils more.
Hello everyone, welcome to our Christmas beer or holiday beer tasting, or well, winter beer tasting if you're doing this after January 1st, because if you label something a Christmas beer, it doesn't sell anywhere past December 31st. Just like pumpkin ale will sell, you know, right up to Halloween but no further, winter ale sells, you know, up until about March 1st, but if you label it a Christmas beer, it goes in the clearance rack January 1. So we're going to start out here with our Samuel Smith's. Well, honestly, in the light of Omicron, they're very poorly timed welcome back ale, which I like the idea. I like that they were trying to say, hey, welcome back to servers and everybody else who was out of work with COVID, but perhaps a tad premature there, Samuel Smith's. But there's a reason we're opening with England, because if we're talking about Christmas ale, or let's just start with Christmas ale, it kind of has a bunch of different origins. And is its origin the Scandinavian countries like Denmark? Yes. Is it England, or particularly the UK, and let's just say Scotland here? Yes. Is its origin Belgium? Yes. Is its origin story kind of also North American? Yes. And I want to walk you all the way back to why all of those things are the case. So let's take us back to about the 9th century in Denmark, Sweden, Finland, general Scandinavian Baltic area. And let's talk about the festival of Yule, the word that gives us the term Yuletide. Now, at that time, they actually had what was called Yule Dag, or Yule Day, which was not exactly the same as Christmas by any means. And one of the big traditions then was brewing a strong, dark ale designed for drinking during this time of the year. But hops weren't really a thing in the 9th century, so how did they add a preservative factor to their strong, dark, Christmassy Yuletide beer? They did it by running it through pine boughs or spruce boughs, which would impart kind of a pine needles characteristic. If you're thinking this sounds a lot like Finnish sahti, which is still made using this method today, you're on the right track. So, starting in the 9th century, we have this tradition of making very strong, kind of pine-scented aroma beers, and that kind of pays forward into Scotland about 800 years later. To 1,000 years later, really. Now, a lot of the United Kingdom, or what's now the United Kingdom, was under the Dane law. So they had Viking or Scandinavian rulers for a very long time, particularly on the west coast of Scotland, up to the kind of, I think, the 17th century with the Lord of the Isles. So there was a very strong Danish and to a certain point Old Norse tradition going on in Scotland. And they're also, even going into the 1800s, there weren't a lot of hops. So this idea of making a dark, strong beer for around the Yuletide, around Christmas time, was still persistent in Scotland. And more than that, the fact that hops were so expensive, but barley was relatively cheap and plentiful, meant that the tradition of making, say, a Scottish-style wee heavy or a Scotch or Scottish ale was very predominant in having very low hopping, but a great deal of kind of roasted and toasted barleys. Now, again, this is pre the invention of dry kilning malts, so at this point, virtually all barley would be roasted over an open fire. So they would all pick up both a dark color as well as a light, smoky characteristic. And again, with hops being very expensive and relatively scarce, as well as the strong Danish tradition or Viking tradition in Scotland, you ended up seeing a little bit of that old school running it through pine or spruce boughs tradition to create a very strong kind of sprucey ale. So then let's take that and apply it to Belgium. Now, Belgium, to a point, is kind of our originator of Christmas ales as we know them today. And the reason for the fact that they're called Christmas beers and not Bier de Noël, or whatever that would translate to in Dutch, is the fact that they were marketed as Christmas ales, because while the Belgians now are thought of as being, you know, these master brewers with the Trappist tradition and the home of Stella Artois, which they do pitch as being like a Christmas beer, from all the research I've done, not actually true. But the Belgians, you know, now we think of them as being synonymous with beer, but in kind of the late 1800s, early 1900s, while they did have the Trappist tradition, most Belgian beer that was being produced at the time was fairly pale, fairly watery. If they made anything at all, it was mostly Belgian wit. So if they wanted something kind of dark and strong and rich, they were actually exporting it out of the UK. And what really caught on for the Belgians, for whatever reason, was what we would now think of as wee heavy, that they would have probably called Scots or Scottish ale, but which we now kind of call Scotch ale. And I promise I really am going somewhere with this. So then that turns around and influences the idea of a Belgian dark strong like Chimay Red or Roquefort 10, and in turn influences like beers like the Belgian quadruple here made by Cabin Brewing, because the Belgians turned around and said, oh, well, this is just a dark strong beer without a lot of hopping. Well, anyone can do that. And they actually started making Scotch ale in Belgium. So the term Scotch ale today in the 21st century doesn't actually refer to Scottish beers. We refer them to those as Scots ales or Scottish ales, or far more commonly as wee heavies, whereas a Scotch ale is the Belgian take on a Scottish wee heavy, usually imported around Christmas time in the late 19th and early 20th century. Aaron, if you'd grab that image for me, we actually have a newspaper clipping from, is it from Charleroi is the name of the town, the Charleroi Journal?
Yes.
This is actually, you'll notice it actually says Christmas, Christmas, even though the rest of the ad is actually in French. This is an advertisement for a celebration of a Scottish brewed Christmas ale being imported into Belgium and sold as Christmas ale. This is one of the very first in-print examples we can find of Christmas ale actually being billed as such. And this was before the Belgians actually started brewing Scotch ale. They were still importing it from Scotland. And that's why we're starting here with Samuel Smith's Winter Welcome Ale. This is a long brewed, I don't think this goes right back to, you know, the old days of, you know, pre-World War II of making Christmas beers, but I believe this is the oldest extant Christmas style or winter warmer style ale that's been brewed for at least 50 years. This is a very classic example, and this is probably what, as similar as we're going to get to what the Belgians were drinking 125 years ago. Now, I don't know if this has a lot of Christmas spices added to it, but if you start looking for things like candied fruits like you'd find in a fruitcake, you start looking for brandied notes, you start looking for sweet, Christmassy berries and juicy fruits, it's all here. This smells wintry, this smells Christmassy. And I've missed a lot of comments. And yeah, it's a big malt bomb. Sahti is S-A-H-T-A-A by my memory, Eric. And basically that's a Finnish pale ale that is run through spruce boughs. And this is not the usual label art. This is, I think, just last year and this year that it's called Welcome Back Ale. And yeah, it is fuggle-tastic. Like, you do get that spicy English hops to it. You get that pretty, like, very classically English style. And this is probably what they were drinking 125 years ago, or something very, very similar to this, that was the impetus of the Christmas ale as at least as a commercial phenomenon. I mean, we've talked about, you know, 1,000 years ago there was the Yule ale that was run through spruce barrels. We have not the first bloody clue what the heck that would have actually tasted like. We have sketchy historical notes. We know it was dark, because all barley pre-British kilning was dark. We know it would not have had hops, because hops in brewing were not a thing at that point. And as a result, it almost certainly would have been run through either pine or spruce boughs. But we know nothing else. We don't know what the kilning rate, we don't know what the alcohol level would have been. It was at the time referred to as being quite strong, but beyond that, we have no idea. Does strong mean 6.5%? Does it mean 11%? It probably wouldn't have been sweet, because it would have brewed strong and then allowed to sit, but they didn't have, you know, perfectly clean yeast strains, so a little bit of funkiness would have set in, would have had some Brettanomyces notes. But again, it's a fairly cold climate, so if it was brewed sweet and then the weather turned cold, would it have soured that much, or would the temperature gradient have actually prevented it from really turning sour? There's so much we don't know. But this style, this is kind of the earliest style that we can really talk about as being a Christmas style ale that was ever marketed as such. So, you know, was this exactly what it would have been? No, but it's about as close as I can come. Is Christmas ale one of the reasons the church tried to ban Christmas in the 1600s? No, but the Christian church actually did encourage the Danes to stop calling it Juledag or Yule ale and to start calling it Christmas ale under penalty of the forfeiture of their brewery. They weren't allowed to call it Yule ale at a certain point. I think in the 12th century or 11th century, they actually had to start calling it Christmas ale because otherwise they would have lost out. And yes, it does seem a little bit light for what we now consider to be a Christmas beer. And we're going to get to that when we get to the Oldman River here, because there's a very good reason for that. Because I did mention that other than Denmark, Scotland, and Belgium, that there was a third place in the world that we could actually call as the home of the modern Christmas beer, which was North America. But that doesn't really come around till 1975, so we'll get to that after our first two, because these two are very similar to each other. Heathens Brewing is going to be our second one here as soon as I finish this glass. And this is going to be a gluten-free beer. So come into this with an open mind, please. Because I've been wanting to talk about a Heathens beer for a while, and I like their winter ale. This is a very faithful recreation, without using barley, of what the Samuel Smiths is kind of going for here. Now, I don't expect that this is going to be to absolutely everyone's taste. Gluten-free beers are always a bit challenging. But if you had to imagine that tomorrow you found out that you couldn't have gluten and that you were now, you know, resigned to this barleyless, wheatless wasteland of, you know, the future, I could get by drinking this just fine. I will point out, so this is actually the brainchild of Jeff Silzer. I think they're actually the smallest in terms of capacity brewery in Calgary. His brew house is incredibly basic. Like it's almost an upscaled home brewery, and I mean that in the nicest way possible. He's clearly spent a lot of his own money putting this together, but really and truly, I've seen some people with like homebrew setups in their garage that are like almost this big, almost this advanced. He's got like a car winch that he uses to like hoist his mash tun over his brew kettle to actually sparge into the kettle. It's incredibly low tech, and I absolutely love Heathens for this. Why I do think they're kind of unique though is he does not make any gluten in beer whatsoever in his brewery. It is gluten-free or nothing. There is no chance of cross-contamination. It is 100% gluten-free. And that's for his whole range. The winter ale is one we get a lot of call for too. He doesn't make it year round, and we always have people starting to call for this one in like early September. And yeah, I'm glad you said smoky, because it does have kind of a cool minty smoke to it. Like, not quite a peat smoke, but if you're thinking that direction, you're not too far off. Oh yeah, this is definitely a superior compromise to vegetarian bacon. I would even argue it's better than the monstrosity that is turkey bacon.
Oh man, I like turkey bacon.
I will actually say Heathens, I think, has been doing very, very well. Whenever I call Jeff and say, hey, I'd like to pick up some beer, he's always like, ooh, what do I still have left? I don't think he's struggling to sell beer, especially since he's only open like 3 days a week. I think he's doing just fine. Because I will say, like, we sold some gluten-free. Like, Bard's did okay. Glutenberg still does fine-ish. The Greens didn't sell because the Greens was honestly quite bad, but it was all you could get for a while. The Heathen stuff just hops out. Like, when we stock the singles fridge, the Heathens are, like, some of the most heavily, like, picked over cans in the shop. They have a following for the gluten-free crowd, and actually as of about 2-3 weeks ago, Heathens is now on Connect, so I can just order them off the big provincial warehouse, which, you know, bad for my exclusive on having Heathens for, you know, Southern Alberta, but good for the fact that he's going to find himself in a lot more stores, maybe into some gluten-free cafes that maybe he couldn't have gotten into before, because just being able to get into Connect where any store doesn't have to drive to his brewery and meet him there to actually pick up beer, that's huge for your distribution, and I think that's a really good step for Heathens. So I'm excited to see where that takes him, although I have a feeling he's going to be sold out of beer more often than usual. And again, I think part of that is also, it's just so small. Like, his fermenters are like, they're laughably tiny, and I love how small scale everything is, and yet the beer's so damn good. Tea smoke is really good. I like that answer. That's perfect. And again, if we'd tasted this after what's coming next, we'd say, oh, well, is that really a winter beer? But when this is your baseline and you're basing your gluten-free winter ale off of something very classic, I can really draw a straight line between these two. I think this certainly has more Christmassy flavors, but I also think that some of that is working within the constraints of a gluten-free brewery. And that's just it. They are going to be a little bit busier, and they are going to have a little less stock to sell. So I really hope this means it's a big explosion for Heathens in terms of popularity, because, I mean, we always hear about, oh, Cabin and 88 and Annex and Establishment, but if you talk to those guys, they're all really, really in awe of what Heathens is doing in terms of the quality that they're turning out without using barley. So hats off to Heathens here. Heathens tasting, it would have to be a $25 tasting, just because gluten-free beer is not cheap. Of everything on the table tonight, including like the one that came from England, we're paying the most for the Heathens can, by like $1.25. And yes, if anybody would be interested in a Heathens tasting, if you're willing to pay the extra $5 for the lineup, I would more than happily do a Heathens tasting, and I know that Jeff Silzer would join us because he's great about it. So yeah, Tyler's in for 25, so maybe we could do a Heathens tasting. I'd love to do one because the beer is great. Just another excuse to drink that peanut butter porter, really. I love that stuff. Yeah. I'm curious what you think of this, Aaron, because I don't know if you've had this before.
I haven't. GF beer? Smells like beer. Oh. Oh, interesting.
Okay, if that comment about Hawkins cheesies is actually true, that's absolutely incredible. Also, I recently learned that hickory sticks are uniquely Canadian, which I wasn't aware of. I know Hawkins cheesies are, I know ketchup chips and all dressed chips are, but I didn't know hickory sticks aren't in the US, but apparently they're not. They're just here.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Part of our heritage.
Okay, so while everybody finishes up their Heathens, I want to kind of go into what I was talking about, Aaron, do you want to bring up that anchor image for me?
Yeah.
Please and thank you.
And
like that?
good.
Okay, so in 1975, Anchor Brewing, which was bought out by Fritz Maytag. So pre the 1970s, Anchor Brewing was a failing operation. They were based in San Francisco, and in this period in history, the brewery industry was consolidating. You had Budweiser, which was Anheuser-Busch, you had Miller, you had Coors. At this point, you would have still had Six, who was owning Stroh's like Rainier and Old Milwaukee. And if you weren't becoming one of the big major regional breweries, you really were on the way out. Craft beer hadn't happened yet, and Anchor Brewing had fought a valiant fight, but they were losing it. So Fritz Maytag, who was the heir to the Maytag Appliances fortune, or one of the heirs, he bought the struggling Anchor Brewery and he started revitalizing it to start making, craft beers. Anchor Brewing, as I've talked about on this channel before, they really did kick off the craft brew revolution in San Francisco. Starting in 1975, Anchor started making Our Special Ale, or for a while there it was called the Merry Christmas Ale, or even Our Special Holiday Ale. It's gone through a lot of different names in its almost 50 years of production. Tragically not sold in Alberta this year, otherwise it would have been on the table today. But it's the real genesis of what we're going to get into here with the Oldman Winter here, or probably the Oldman River beer. Oldman Winter is a different thing. The Oldman River beer, these heavily spiced vanilla, clove, cinnamon, what we kind of think of as like a North American style Christmas beer. This goes back to Anchor's Our Special Holiday Ale, or Our Special Ale, and apparently they've never made the same recipe twice. It's always slightly different. I don't know if we ever had a chance to have all, whatever it would be, 46 years side by side, if we'd really be able to tell all that much of a difference, other than the fact that ones from 1975 would be disgusting now. But they always change the recipe, but they really have created what we now think of as this Christmas ale style, this let's add chocolate, let's add cherries, let's add pine and clove and cinnamon and everything, and it creates this different style. That wasn't the old school Christmas style beers, but it is the Anchor style, the North American style Christmas beer, which we're going to taste next. And that's kind of why I split this tasting in two, is they're all Christmas beers, but there's kind of the old school and then the post-1975 Anchor style. So let's visit our friends in Lundbrook here from Oldman River Brewing. This is their Vanilla Rye Porter. Not the darkest porter in the world I've ever seen. I'd broadly call that pretty close to a brown ale, but all right, if you say it's a porter, we'll follow your lead. The vanilla is right there. Oh yeah, there were so many other things I wanted to do for this tasting. I wanted to do Deschutes Jubile Ale, but I couldn't get it. I wanted to do Anchor's Our Special Ale. I couldn't get it. I really wanted to actually get like a Belgian Scotch Ale or a Belgian Christmas style ale. Couldn't find anything on Connect. A Schoof actually, for a very long time, made an excellent Scotch ale. It's still listed on Connect, but it's out of stock. I'm guessing just due to COVID shipping woes. There's another one out of Vancouver. No, I'm not doing Granville Lions Winter. I don't hate you folks. What was the other one I was going to do? I mean, we could also have done something like Sierra Nevada's Celebration Ale, which is a Christmas IPA. But I wanted to do something a little more traditional. But the big one I really am missing for this was Anchor Christmas, and I was actually going to do Deschutes Jubile Ale as the substitute for Anchor, because Deschutes has been around for ages, and Jubile is, I think, a very direct spiritual successor from Anchor Winter, because it is a Pacific Northwest microbrewery that kind of got their start in the 1980s. They've been around a while. If they started making Jubile Ale back when they started, and they have, really their reference point would have had to be Anchor, and I thought that was going to be really nice, and then that was out of stock. So this has been a little tricky to put together, because every time I had a good idea, that idea immediately sold out. Ooh, Creemore Urbach. Never tried that. And yeah, they also change the label every year, Eric. They change the recipe every year, and they change the label every year, which I think is awesome. So vanilla rye porter. I don't know if this is very heavily spiced other than the vanilla, and the only reason I'm saying that is that rye on its own is so incredibly spicy that this could actually be unspiced. It's just they really found a way to maximize that rye character. Now, as Ty last week with Hell's Basement was talking about, rye is really brutally difficult to brew with, and like 15% rye is considered a lot because it gets so gluey and sticky. I think they're getting so much spice out of this rye. And I'm right on the fence as to saying whether this was actually spiced with other things, or if the rye spiced the vanilla and the snowflakes on the can are making us pick up other things. Don't laugh. The fact is, when you say this is a Christmas ale, it starts putting things in your mind from other Christmas beers you've had.
That's true. It usually means I don't want to buy it.
We'll try this and see if you stop being such an unfailing grump. It's like Mike Malloy was still alive and with us today. He's not actually dead, sorry. He had a cold, so he hasn't been at work for 2 days, but, you know. Yeah, Oldman does not disappoint with this one. I think this is absolutely rock star.
That is good.
But I do want to point out just how different this style is from this. If all you'd ever had as a winter ale was this, and then you got into this, you'd be like, what the hell is going on here? It's an absolute shock to the system how different they are. And that's why I kind of introduced the old school winter ales versus the post 1975. And let's be fair, Anchor's bigger than this. It's even more intense. It always has this massive sprucey pine hit to it. This is very much in that North American style. I quite like this. This is so far my favorite thing on the table. Yes, and this is actually a new Christmas beer for them because they did the Bad Santa barley wine for the either last 2 years in a row or the last 3 years in a row, which was an excellent beer. I think I like this better, and it's certainly selling better than Bad Santa, because Bad Santa I bring like 1 case of 12 750ml bottles, and like I would still have some left in January. I think I'm on my 6th flat of this, and it's almost gone. This has been hopping out for us really, really well. So I'm hoping they're going to have this at least till January, but like we are selling buckets and buckets of this vanilla rye porter because it is great. Tragically, it does not end in a barley wine. No. I mean, if you want something in that family, the Cabin Chapter 3 is absolutely spectacular. Aaron, Sky, myself, and whoever else was working Wednesday night, we split a bottle before the whiskey tasting, didn't we?
Yep.
Yeah, that was actually really nice.
It was good.
Yeah.
Very good.
So,
I think it was.
Yeah, that was actually really fun.
Last year, I remember, was maybe that's what Sean's making mention of.
Oh, the barley wine tasting? Oh, God.
Well, it was the... Did we do a whole tasting?
We did a whole barley wine
my
tasting.
God,
It was a giant mess, yes.
I wonder I don't remember it.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a blackout sort of night.
Jesus.
And yeah, there were people who really loved Bad Santa, but oh God, opening wax. Yes, I think Mark was the one I made open this on Friday night. I think it took the better part of like 15 minutes for Mark to like hack his way. Ethan's laughing because he was there for that. It took us like forever to hack through this wax top. I love wax tops. They look so cool and pretty. I just never want to have to open another one in my life. Foil tops I think are fun. I think they look very classy. There used to be a lot more foil tops even on like domestic beers back in the day. I can remember like Labatt's John Labatt Classic Lager, which I think wasn't a Christmas beer. It was only available in the winter because you only drink pale lager in the winter. But those always had a foil top. Pilsner Urquell for the longest time had a foil top when it still came in bottles. They're wildly wasteful, but for something very, very special, I still kind of like them. I think they look very fun. Shut up, Aaron.
Agreed.
Very few remember that night. That's probably true.
Yeah, it was heavy.
That was a heavy night.
There was another tasting last year that we ended Like, we had an example barley wine on the table and ended up drinking it as our 5th beer.
That was the Oldman River tasting, and we drank that. Yep.
Oh, that was the bad
That was
Santa,
that was the bad
right.
Santa. That's absolutely what that was.
Right.
Was that the barley wine tasting? Or was that the Oldman River
I
tasting?
think that was the Old Man River taste.
I think it was too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is the wax strictly aesthetic these days? It is. I think that at some point there was probably a case to be made back when corks were still cut by hand. Not necessarily for a beer bottle covered in wax, but wine bottles were often dipped in wax to help the cork along with its sealing, if only so that it would retain more moisture in the cork and keep the cork from drying out, keep anything from, you know, burrowing into the cork, because certain insects will actually eat cork and then kind of end up drowning in the wine. But there was a point for it, perhaps historically, probably not for beer ever, but for wine there certainly was. And you would very often see like amphorae or barrels being stoppered with wax, but you wouldn't see bottles stoppered with wax. That really doesn't have any major historical precedent in my memory. Sherries were often done that way, and some wine regions that were influenced by the Spanish. I can think of like some older South American bottles that were stoppered with wax, just because they were kind of copying the Spanish. But beyond that, I can't think of any. Wax is almost purely aesthetic. Oh man, half pints barley wine. Oh, that was a good one.
I don't remember it.
Oh, that's before we ever started doing this. Yeah, barley wine. God, barley wine was like 2007 to 2011, something like that, like years and years ago. Okay, moving right along. We do a wine tasting coming up this Friday. I was going to say next week. That is incorrect. Yeah. This Friday, our last tasting before Christmas. Good heavens, we're there already. We're going to do 2 wines that go really well with Christmas dinner, whether you are doing ham or turkey. I think these two do very, very, very well with turkey, actually. And then over here, we're going to do a sparkling white and a sparkling red, kind of as a New Year's Eve sort of theme. Mostly because I want an excuse to drink this Lambrusco, because I think it really rocks. On the Christmas dinner wine side, we're going to Aligote, kind of the lesser child to Chardonnay. It's always been kind of overlooked. It's starting to get fashionable. I want to talk about it. The Leze, this is kind of a hybrid red, hybrid rosé, made by Elisabetta Foradori, made from 100% Terral Dago. Really, really fun, light, crunchy red/rosé that I think is basically cranberry sauce in a bottle. It's perfect with turkey. Cuvée Malmaison, want to talk a little bit about the fact that Limoux wine region actually invented sparkling wine before Champagne did. And this Lambrusco is just a ton of fun, and I want to talk about Lambrusco as being a little bit more of a serious wine region than perhaps we've learned about before. Lambrusco tended to be very, very cheap for a long time and very sweet, but they don't have to be that way. Devin and I actually earlier today opened a bottle of wine that we just got actually this morning, brand new for us, because our German shipment that I was supposed to be here about October 1st so I could sell it for Christmas just arrived. But we have this absolutely fantastic Scheurebe. Actually, Aaron, so that bottle's sitting right there if you grab it for me, right next to that empty Caesar can. That's the one. Yep.
Half gone.
Half gone. Well, yes, we were into it earlier. This is the Seebrick Scheurebe. Scheurebe literally means Scheu's grape. This is a bit of a passion project for me. I really like Scheurebe. We've sold the Müller Catoire before. I'm actually working at getting like an exclusively bottled Scheurebe for, actually this is the first time I've talked about this on camera. I'm actually working with Andreas Bender. Don't know if it's gonna come all the way to fruition, but I'm looking to buy a pallet of Scheurebe, exclusive for our store, exclusive for North America, possibly exclusive to the world, because he's actually making it to my specification as like summer crushing wine.
That rules.
So that hasn't happened yet, won't for 5-6 months, but in the meantime we have the Scheurebe. Steve Firth, ex of our Scotch tastings of course, was in earlier and had a glass with me, and he was like, well, this just goes with ham. I was like, you're right, this goes perfectly with ham. Not going to be part of the tasting because at the time we announced the tasting, this wasn't here yet, and I wasn't sure it was going to arrive before Christmas. So we'll talk about this wine perhaps a little bit on Friday night as being a perfect ham pairing. But if you're doing ham, do look for this really plain Jane wine that has an anchor on it. But this is fun stuff. Okay, let's move straight on into Muskoka. I'm into a little bit of international shenanigans. Yes, it's I've had some fun this year cooking up crazy plans. Now, do I know for absolute certain that this is going to happen? No, but I know for certain he's making the wine. He's definitely going to make a batch of wine from Scheurebe, kind of with me as the sole client in mind, but I have right of refusal. If it doesn't meet my specifications, if I don't think it works, then I'm just going to say no. But if it, and I really hope it works, oh my god, it's going to be so much fun having like a wine made exclusively for me to sell in my store and just be like, hi, this is this grape that I care about, but basically no one else on earth cares about, but I had it made for me, and just drink it. It's going to make your whole summer better. I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be a lot of fun for me.
What are you going to call it?
What am I going to call it?
You get to name it too?
It's going to be called Andreas Bender Scheurebe.
Oh, okay. Because
I'm not a winemaker who's going to call it Kyle's Wine. Stupid.
Oh,
no, none of that.
Rule,
no, I'm not doing that. Worried about the last one. Worried about Cranberry beer because the last one was a drain pour. I mean, Muskoka is one of like the oldest craft breweries in Canada. Founded in 1996. That's about the same time Unibrew got going. I've had some Muskoka stuff. They don't really sell. I've had them in the store off and on. They've never been a big seller for us. But you know what? I was really desperate because I couldn't get Anchor or Jubile Ale or Scotch Ale. I needed something wintry, so I brought this in purely on the reputation of Muskoka. The first time I had it was like at the start of tonight, just hoping it wouldn't suck in. I don't think it does. I think it has chocolate. I think it has cranberry. I think it's pleasant enough. The chocolate really comes through, and I think this reminds me a great deal of like Wild Rose's chocolate cherry porter a great deal. It's very pretty. No, that's just fine. This makes up for the SS. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good label, I will say. Yeah, that works for me. It's not quite as good in the mouth, and I think it finishes a little tiny bit cardboardy. I'm not 100% sold on this. I don't think I'll bring this in for the shop. But I will say, if you're here for the nose, if you're here for the chocolate-covered cherries, chocolate-covered berries nose, and it's not dark chocolate, it's milk chocolate, which is nice. You get a sweet round fruitiness, you get the chocolate, you get the balance, you get that rich body. It is 8% alcohol, it's a big beer. And if you're the one phoning, please stop. It's been ringing for like 5 minutes straight.
Shut it off.
I don't think we can shut it off.
There's no point.
No.
It'll just keep ringing.
It'll just keep ringing. Fernie did do the Black Mammoth, but it only comes in the 650 ml tall cans, I'm pretty sure, so I couldn't make that work. And I've never been like 100% sold on Black Mammoth. It almost kind of comes off like eucalyptus for me. Like I have no problem with licorice in the beer or aniseed, but I don't want it to come off eucalyptusy because I find I get really sick of that flavor really fast. And yeah, I was just about to say, I don't think the body quite lines up for this being an 8% beer, especially not for what they're calling like a double stout. It's calling it a double chocolate cranberry stout, not a double stout, but I kind of want more body. Like this is exactly what you said. It's a little tiny bit light. And I kind of want more body. Like the chocolate's there. I don't know if I'd call it cranberry. I'd certainly call it red berry. I think I call it chocolate covered cherries earlier. I don't know if it's, you know, we talked about plums being very difficult to brew with last week with Thai. I don't know if cranberries are very difficult to brew with as a fruit. But yeah, it really doesn't have the body I'd want for 8% bloody alcohol. I'd want it to be bigger. Oh, thank you, Eric. Yeah, we've brought in some more things, and you haven't even seen the new Omnipolo stuff that hasn't hit the shelf yet. That's gonna hit the shelves tomorrow. And yes, we realized about November 1st that we really needed to up our game in the singles fridge, so we made some adjustments there. Cabin is doing a re-release of their Wee Heavy, but they're doing it as a gift pack, and I couldn't get any for the shop. They're exclusively through Cabin, but you can buy the chapters 1, 2, and 3 as a 3-pack through Cabin, only through their own gift shop. So if you're going to be in Calgary between now and Christmas and you liked that beer, or you really, really like somebody, because it is not a cheap gift pack, yeah, that would be worth picking up, because you're right, the Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 were fantastic. The Chapter 3 is really nice. In a vacuum, I think I like Chapters 1 and 2 more, but yeah, I think that would be really fun, because I like their bigger beers. Oh, you mean the Wee Heavy they put in small cans? I don't think they're ever going to make that again because nobody bought it. We struggled to sell it. Cabin struggled to sell it. That was not a good seller. No, I don't think that one's coming back. It was a cool beer, but like I still had that on the shelf in July. Like that took a minute. Ooh, new Blind Ranch exclusive. We're looking forward to that. And yeah, I think, so I made my last trip to Calgary before Christmas and maybe before the New Year yesterday. It's now Wednesday, so I can talk about it. Annex has a new Baltic Porter, which we're going to have on the shelves about 2 hours ago, so that's out there now. It's called Borrowed Time. I got to try it on tap while I was there. Very fruity, because they actually did do the lagering that you're supposed to do on a Baltic Porter. That's new. I did get a little bit more of the Nectar IPA from Establishment. And then, unless there's some new stuff on the 88 delivery coming down Friday, which there might be one new thing, that might be it for like cool exclusive stuff till after Christmas. I'm, just like with the beer tastings, going to either focus on the store or take a little bit of personal time right around Christmas, New Year's. So we will get right back to this in January. So, I'm not going to have like a state of the year with you right now, and there's a reason for that. That is because, if not our very first, then one of our first two tastings, if not both of our first two tastings, are going to be a State of the Alberta Beer Scene 2021. I'm hoping with Jesse from 88 and Rupert from Annex will be our guests for that. Failing that, it might be Dave Ronneberg from Establishment, and I've just given up on asking Cabin. So it'll be 2 out of those 3, because I want to talk about what this last beer year that was looked like for them, if New England IPA perhaps has now jumped the shark, what the predictions are for big beer styles in 2022, and kind of where we are after 2 years of COVID and kind of the wildly changed beer scene, because it certainly wasn't the intention of me doing these. It was just literally to keep the store open. But we've kind of done these through one of the most interesting periods in the Alberta craft beer scene. I want to do a little bit of a reflection on that and have a couple of really good guests to talk about where we've been this last 12 months. Because 2021, it sure changed a lot of things. So look forward to that in the new year. If you're joining us on Friday night, I will see you once more before Christmas. But if you're just not into wine or you have plans Friday night, I will see you next year. Thank you so much for joining us for these incredible Wednesday night beer tastings for all of this year. Have a wonderful and safe holidays, and I'll see you next year. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Sky.
Thanks, Kyle.
Have a wonderful night.